set out to do this research and write this book, Rethinking the MBA, with my colleague at AACSB, Patrick Cullen?
I was charged with looking at the future of MBA education. I took one look at the size of the topic and decided that it was not a one-person job, and looked around for a colleague who I thoroughly enjoyed working with, I had experience with before, but could bring a slightly different perspective. And that was Srikant. So I corralled him into this project, which was initially designed just for a single day's event at Harvard Business School, a discussion of where might the MBA go. Then we started our interviews. One colloquia led to two for outsiders as well as the MBA faculty within HBS, and that led eventually to a book.
We had no idea what would come out of it, because remember, this project started in 2006 end, 2 years before the 7, and at that time the world looked fantastic. I mean, it looked like everything in management education was going great. Lots of countries were embracing market capitalism, so the demand for managers would be massive, huge, and we were thinking maybe we reaffirm that everything is going to stop, as events turned out later. It turned out to be a fairly, we had went back and did a lot of our work again post-crisis, because as you know, the book only was published in 2010. And we weren't really, the idea was one symposium, two, and that's it. And then I think it just, as we got more into it, it got more and more exciting to do the work. And again, writing the book was took a large chunk of time to do, because getting all the details, getting all the data, and doing these interviews, merging the interviews and the data was quite a big task, but thoroughly enjoyable. And every time we see some impact like that, I always call him up. I said, "See what you have wrought."
Well, that's great. I'm curious about this possibility that you might just reaffirm that we were doing the right things, and how the growth in the MBA was proceeding. But instead, when you started doing these interviews with executives in business school, deans and directors, if I remember the chapter title well, you began to hear a chorus of concerns. And maybe you could just tell us about those findings. What did you begin to learn as you did these interviews?
So first, the overarching topic. We really approached the interviews with both the deans and the executives with a single question. What today is the value added of the MBA degree? So it was a very open-ended probe. Really, we didn't have priors. And our expectation, based on Harvard, was that things were going reasonably well. And then we heard this rising chorus of concerns. And the concerns really fell in two broad buckets. So one was this concern that you're not teaching more than knowledge. It's very much an academic perspective. And we borrowed from West Point a trilogy of knowing, doing, and being. That every professional school should have some material in each one of those buckets. Things that you need to know, knowledge, like the 4 P's of marketing, the 5 forces of strategy. Things you need to be able to do, or skills, like how to conduct a performance review or conduct a negotiation. And then being, a sense of professional identity and responsibility. And then the second big bucket was a set of more specific, concrete arenas in which people felt we could do much more. A global mindset, creative, innovative thinking, organizational realities, where people felt MBAs were coming out with a limited and often distorted view of the way the world actually worked.
And I think as we began then sort of putting all these pieces together, what you very quickly realize is that management isn't an individual activity. It's unlike a relationship between a doctor and a lawyer and their clients, or an architect or an accountant. Managers rely on designing organizations, working with people around them in order to have a big impact, and that's why society wants us to form companies and create the jobs and the economic well-being that results. So without this notion that you actually have to have self-awareness, you have to have an impact on others, you have to think about the roles and responsibilities, nothing will get done. So that gets us to the doing part. And if nothing gets done, then all the knowledge we're providing is really not having the kind of impact we would want managers to have. And so as we looked at that West Point model and then started talking about knowing, doing, and being, we realized very quickly that how important it is to have these three things together.
Can you tell me a little bit about the two cultures problem? Maybe we'll come back to that when we talk a little bit about faculty. But
I think it was a very important finding. I think from our research, it was something that lots of people before us had written.
Mm-hmm.
But when we interviewed a lot of the deans particularly, and then certainly as we did a lot of our detailed case studies, as you know, we did 6 very in-depth case studies. This two cultures problem became a very, and put it very simply, the two cultures problem simply says that, for a long time before the Carnegie Corporation and Ford Foundation reports, management education was thought not to have as good a scientific base, and that we needed to bring the social sciences into management education. As we did that, there were a phenomenal number of curricular development and teacher development programs that were run. I think the AACSB had an important role to play there, that raised the level of the game in terms of how do you do good scientific work on business problems. And that was we say in the book, it was a very important development that occurred. I think the problem that we referred to in the two cultures story or the situation is that once this form of research became the accepted form of research, it started excluding a number of other very crucial forms of research that fortunately I think we at the Harvard Business School have not excluded, but crucial forms of research that look at synthesis, application, field-based work, which don't fall into the standard way in which typically the social science research in the journals would operate. And what we argued in the book was that management education would be much better off if in fact scholars and academics embraced all these forms of research. We're not saying exclude this other form, but all forms of research. And that would really help it to, move a few steps forward.
We propose significant changes in the curriculum, and change is often resisted. So the question was, how can we overcome those barriers to change? And our conclusion was, if we can show people practices that already exist at business schools worldwide, much of the resistance goes away. Because the common reaction, yes, but it can't be done, is undercut. We can say it already exists here, 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 whether it's self-awareness, globalization, and the like. And that led us to have a number of very specific recommendations.
Yeah. So, one, I'll just go through in each of the 3 buckets that we happen to talk about on knowing, doing, and being, and I've in many talks now have been using this way of trying to explain it a little bit, which is, if you think about some of the knowing recommendations, we have some recommendations in the knowing area, so things like global thinking, integrative thinking, innovative thinking, these are thinking skills that go beyond just knowing a particular body of material. So if my left hand looks at is no information on a particular topic, I want to make an investment decision into a new market, and my right hand is the manager has everything they would need to know on it. Much of management research has focused on moving the left hand towards the right, and in very, very important ways. David mentioned several in his earlier comments about 4 P's of marketing and thinking about the competitive model of strategy and so on. Unfortunately, of course, the right hand keeps moving away as well, because the world gets more complex, product life cycles get shorter, globalization comes in, So no matter how well a manager has been trained up to, if you're only relying on this, and our cycles for discovery take a long time, so we are never going to be at this end. You are always, as a manager, going to be in the back, in the gap. There is going to be idiosyncratic, situation-specific, cultural-specific issues that will come up. And the question is, if you look at management education from this side rather than from this side. This side you say, just let's keep doing what we were doing. If you look at it from this side, you say, wow, is there a way to train people how to live in this gap? Is there a way for them to think about a different way of doing things, being and knowing, so that when they are faced with that situation, we have trained them to do it. So if you think about our recommendations on integrative thinking, if you think about our recommendations on global thinking, on innovative thinking, they're all saying, okay, if you're in this gap, if you're in a situation that you don't really know, how do you go about thinking about it? And so there were a number of recommendations that fell into that. The second set David has already talked about on doing, and I think it had 2 or 3 dimensions. One on the dimension that there are certain, as David described it, art and craft that, and the practice of management that students need to learn. So, you know, how do you do sales? How do you give critical feedback, as David mentioned? And then, as he said, some of these doing skills, particularly innovative thinking, which was one more in that category, you only learn by actually doing it. And in the book, we almost, in a slightly joking way, say that, you know, you wouldn't teach people swimming by giving them a long lecture or, teaching them by the case method. You would actually put someone in the pool, and there are certain skills you only learn by actually doing it, and that's the second part. And then on the being side, as we've already discussed, it's not an individual thing and not an individual activity. It's something that you rely on a lot of people and the impact you have on others around you. So how do you appreciate differences? How do you get more empathy and understanding about motivating people, self-awareness about yourself, understanding leadership roles and what's the role of business in society? These are important things for a manager to know. And that then became the set of recommendations that we made on being.